Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best and some of the worst recordings of Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1, that iconic work which has been in the repertoire of every great pianist since, well, what was it, 1875 or so, when it was premiered by Hans von Bülow and the Boston Symphony in Boston, of all places. Tchaikovsky then proceeded to tinker and play with it, and there are like 3 different versions of it. He finally finalized it around 1888, which, of course, has not stopped today's wonderful scholarly pianist people from going back to Tchaikovsky's original version, which should have been destroyed and thrown away for all time. Not because it's so terrible, but because it's just not necessary. We don't need it. We don't care. So if you see it, ignore it. Just ignore it, please. Do yourself a favor. You make yourself crazy. It's ridiculous. As for the other worst ever performance, well, that one's easy. Everybody knows which one it is. It's Richter and Karajan, because the two of them hated each other and didn't get along at all. I mean, they also recorded the Beethoven Triple Concerto, didn't they, or something like that. But the bottom line is it's a horrible performance by 2 egomaniacs who couldn't see eye to eye. So we don't ever have to deal with that either. Now, I have here, I don't know, about 16 different recordings. I've whittled things down to, I own about 4 times that many. It's just not worth going into it in greater depth, because there are no greater depths to go into. There's only one person's opinion versus another person's opinion. And so I can only tell you what I think the best are, as usual. In fact, I was thinking of doing this originally as one of the Dave's faves, because then I would just say, there's one, and that's that. But I said, no. Some of you diehard people are fetching and bitching about the fact that you want to see more repertoire stuff done. And I was going to do it that way anyway originally. And so I said, okay, let's do the full panoply repertoire extravaganza. And so here it is. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is this one. Van Cliburn with Kirill Kondrashin from 1958. Now, this is not a classical recording at all. It's a pop record. It is the first classical recording ever to go platinum. I think it went triple platinum, to be honest with you. It was unbelievably popular. It transmuted the 20-something-year-old Van Cliburn in 1958 from a talented budding virtuoso to a political superstar. And from that time on, his career was straight down, absolutely straight down. And it's such a shame. It's very sad what happened to him, to be honest with you, because he had not really matured as an artist. He was a very talented young guy with a warm, romantic, big-hearted sort of technique. And it was a perfect concerto for him, because he just played it with all of that sort of open, romantic, big-boned muscularity that the music seems to demand. The Russians loved it. They made a record. Testament issued a live version of the actual Tchaikovsky competition. It was a Cold War bombshell. It turned him into a ticker tape parade front page news guy. And so everyone owned this recording. I had it. We all had it. Truth of the matter is, it's a okay performance. It's a decent, enthusiastic, fresh, romantic, not especially interesting performance. Today, given what's come since, I would say it's just average. I really would. And it's really kind of a pity, because he could have continued his career apace and continued to grow and mature as an artist, but it wasn't permitted to him. And it just wasn't. And he was basically kind of a shy and retiring guy. And, he was a quiet homosexual. And he had, very little opportunity to develop his art. And he didn't. It didn't. So, he basically burnt himself out over the next decade and a half or so. Then he popped up once in a while to play for a president or head of state. He was trotted out for state occasions. It was really very, very sad. And so this is one of his best recordings, without a doubt. Is it one of the great Tchaikovsky first piano concertos? No, absolutely not. It's an interesting historical document. But as a musical experience, meh, what can I say? And it's a shame. It's just a shame. But I have to mention it because there it is. So now let's talk about the really good ones. And I've divided them up. Well, I've sort of divided them up into 2 or 3 kind of groupies, depending on how you divide up the groupies. They are sort of the classic old school piano people. And then there are the slightly newer school or younger piano people. And then, the ones that are really just terrifically, fabulously great, in my humble view. And, there's just a lot of them. Lots and lots and lots of them. So let's just get through it, shall we? First, if you're into, historical stuff, there are 2 recordings that you really ought to hear. And they're really important. And I'm not going back into historical, 78s. You could do that. I'll mention a couple of them, but no, we're not going there because there's no need. There's absolutely no need given what we have in reasonable fidelity. And by that I include, decent mono up to the present time. So I said before that Richter and Karajan just suck, and they do. But if you want to hear Richter do it, you can with Karl Ancherl. And it's marvelous. It's right here on Superfun. It's a mono recording, but it sounds perfectly fine. And it is an excellent performance, as you might expect. You got the Czech Philharmonic. You got Ancherl, who's a great conductor in this stuff. You've got Richter, who liked being in Prague and who had a good time making this recording, more or less. He was also younger and in somewhat fresher estate than he was with Karajan. So, sure, by all means, go for this if you want. It also contains an absolutely amazing and horribly underrated Prokofiev Piano Concerto No. 2, performed by that inestimably famous pianist that no one's ever heard of. No, Dagmar Blagova. She's really good. She's really good. And, Ancherl was one of the great Prokofiev conductors. This is one dynamite performance of the second piano concerto, and it's in stereo. So this is a great record, 2 fabulous concertos, and, and the Richter is Richter. So what have you got to lose, right? Worth considering, by all means. Next, for sort of historical fans, now this is in the box, it's in the Zell box, but the Zell Horwitz. Now this one is on Palexa, which doesn't exist anymore, I don't think, but this recording of the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto was in the Zell box. It's with Horwitz and Zell from 1953 live. December 1st, and it's one of those completely nuts, insane, fire and brimstone, take no prisoners, missed notes be damned kind of expostulations that you will just want to hear because it's amazing. It's just amazing. If you have the Zell box, you have it. If not, well, if you can find this, you can find it. This is also coupled with another Tchaikovsky first piano concerto with Rubinstein and Rodzinski from 1946 live, which is also quite the barn burner. Rather different from Rubinstein's studio recordings about which we will think about very shortly. But this was great. This is just amazing. It was tons and tons of fun. Far better than Horwitz's earlier recordings and this in the 78s and whatever the heck, and Toscanini or whoever else was doing it. I don't even remember. I don't care. After you hear this, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't. So we're not going to go there. Horwitz and Zell. Ooh, an experience. So that's historical stuff. Now we're going to talk about some of the old school people, most of whom have recorded the piece more than once, or a lot of them did. There's Gilels and Reiner, which, as you might expect, is quite Gilels and Reiner-ish. That is, it's another big-boned, hefty macho interpretation that's really well recorded, and it's lots of fun to listen to, and it's a lot better than Gilels' later recording, because he redid it. I don't know, maybe more than once. Who knows? He redid it with Zubin Mehta, I think, actually. I think it was like a really early Sony Digital One of you folks will tell me. I have it sitting over there somewhere. I never listened to it. This I would listen to once in a while. It's a classic, living stereo, really fine. What's not to love? It's Russian, Then we've got Zell again, this time with Gary Graffman, which is in the Gary Graffman box. It's also here. It was a great performances. Zell was really good at this stuff. He was a wonderful Tchaikovsky conductor when he could be persuaded to do it. He recorded the fourth, with the London Symphony on Decca, and the fifth with Cleveland. It's a dynamite performance. And this is really, really beautiful for the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto. It's a performance that I think tends to be overlooked. Graffman was an intellectual pianist. He was not a fire and brimstone sort of romantic. He was more restrained, but wonderfully, wonderfully elegant. Thank you. He was kind of like Nathan Milstein at the keyboard, if you know what I mean. Just one of those very, very cultured and delightful pianists. And this is a beautiful, beautiful, civilized performance. If you want like panting and heaving, and certainly there's nothing wrong with panting and heaving in this music, he's not the guy for you. But there's a lot of musicality, and it's very much worth hearing. So there you go. We'll be talking about more panting and heaving in a moment. Oh, speaking of panting and heaving, Earl Wild. Yeah, Earl Wild, who was, just an echt romantic guy. And this one is with who? Who's with it? The Royal Philharmonic and Anatole Fistulari, who could always be counted on to sort of bring home the bacon in an unsubtle way. This is a lot of fun. This is on Chesky, where it's like, flitting around now, I couldn't tell you. But Earl Wild is one of those guys who I just always want to hear in romantic repertoire because he was to the manner born, and he always gave his very best in this kind of music. Tchaikovsky and Liszt and Chopin and all those heavy duty and some of the weird romantics. The ones we don't listen to, like Charvenka and those people. It's just great. So this one is also worth hearing, and it's great fun. And then, of course, there is Arthur Rubinstein. Now, I've been talking about him a little bit lately because people have sort of forgotten about him. One of the most cultured, generous, warm-hearted, giving, musical guys ever touched a keyboard. He's wonderful. Now, he recorded this 3 times. In the early days, he recorded it with Barbaroli, and it's in the Barbaroli box, and he recorded it with Metropolis, and it's going to be in the Metropolis box, I suspect. And then this one with Erich Leinsdorf from the early 60s. This is the recording that I learned the piece from, and I have always loved it. I really have, because it has nobility and just warmth and generosity. It's kind of like grown-up Van Cliburn, actually. I mean, the technique is fine, and everything about it is just very, very inevitable and easy, and there are no structural issues or things that make you stop and say, oh, what was that? You know what I mean? Because that can happen with these pieces. It's a beautiful, beautiful performance with the Boston Symphony, just absolutely elegant. And of course, the Boston Symphony was the hometown team for the premiere. Although I suppose in 1960, there were not too many people who had been around in, 1875 or whenever that was. But that's okay. It's the thought that counts, right? It's the provenance. But Rubinstein's provenance, he was around when Tchaikovsky was around. So what the heck? Great stuff. Absolutely great stuff. Okay, so that's the old school pile. Now, we're going to be getting to sort of newer people. I mean, the next generation, because these are also people, a lot of whom are dead. So we're not really, they might still be considered old school by some of us, But these are wonderful performances too. And I've enjoyed them to death. I really have. Since for decades or weeks or years or however long I've had them, just some marvelous pianism that shows that the work is alive and well. And I do have to say, despite the fact that it's still been recorded quite frequently, the piece has lost a lot of its luster, it seems to me. It doesn't get performed the way it used to be, certainly not as frequently. And it doesn't get talked about the way it was. Maybe because Van Cliburn, Van Cliburn's win at the Tchaikovsky competition gave people an excuse to talk more and listen less, which they always like to do when it comes to music, especially large works in classical forms. I mean, it just seems that this piece, like most of Tchaikovsky, to be honest with you, has become sort of relegated to the second rank. And that's a shame, because it's a glorious piece of music, as you all know. And it really does not deserve to be poo-pooed by anybody. Pianists these days also think it's too easy. I mean, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, sure, if you have like insane technique, yeah, you may think it's easy, but that doesn't mean it's intelligently easy. I mean, in other words, that you can just toss it off and never think. You know, the bottom line is, you know, Tchaikovsky, for all that people criticize him for his, you know, sometimes awkwardness in large forms, really knew what he was doing. Even if he had to bang things into shape and revise stuff a little bit, he knew where he was going with his music, and there's a lot more intellect in it than people give it credit for having. And so some of these more recent performances explore that. One of the ones that really does is this one, Pletnev. You know, Pletnev was at one point in his life a decent pianist. Maybe he still is. Who knows what he's doing? He's a horrible conductor. He's just ridiculous as a conductor, and he doesn't seem to be too interested in playing the piano anymore. But this performance, this set actually, with Pletnev and the Philharmonia under Fedosiev, has all the Tchaikovsky piano concertos plus the Concert Fantasy, which is really a good work that nobody knows. The Concert Fantasy is a concerto-length, you know, really cool piece of music that you really should get to know if you don't. Anyway, this has all of that. You know, Pletnev is a weird character, because as a pianist, he's very free and often very interesting. You know, he's romantic in that sense. You know, in other words, he likes to tinker with the text and play around with tempi and all that. And that tends to work when he's a soloist playing. When he's a conductor, it just sounds stupid and mechanical and contrived, and it's awful. It's a very interesting study somebody could do about it, really. But this Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto has lots of personal touches and wonderful, you know, exploitation of inner voices and moments of sudden repose, and it's just terrific, and virtuosity to burn. So I really recommend it, and it's a wonderful alternative view of the work. So Pletnev on Virgin, which is now EMI, which is now Warner. So who knows where the hell it is. This was a big surprise. Jed Disler recommended this in his review on ClassicsToday.com. And I really recommend that you give it a shot. This is Konstantin Sherbakov with the Russian Philharmonic Orchestra under Dmitry Yablonsky on Naxos. There's some awfully fine piano playing on this record. The orchestra, yeah, it's fairly ordinary, and the sonics are not like, you know, demonstration quality. This was originally released as like an SACD or DVD audio or something like that. This sounds much better. In normal stereo, I think it's actually pretty good. But Sherbakov just plays it with complete command and lots of excitement, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful performance that I've enjoyed enormously. I really have. And thank you, Jed, for including this one in your reviews for Classics Today, because you're absolutely right, and it deserves to be given a lot more attention than it usually gets, because Sherbakov was a very, very fine pianist, and this is just excellent, excellent, excellent. Then we have another wonderful young Russian guy, Yevgeny Sudbin on Bis. Now, this is coupled with the Sao Paulo Symphony, under John Neschling, and it contains the Mettner First Piano Concerto, which is quite a considerable coupling. You know, Mettner has been described as sort of Rachmaninoff without the tunes, which I think is a pretty accurate description of him. He's kind of very Russian, a little bit glum, very pianistic. Almost all of his music includes the piano. And this is a wonderful performance of the Mettner Concerto, too. So if you want to get a very fine Tchaikovsky First with a very, very interesting coupling that you don't get to hear every day, this is a great disc to sample, and the sonics are fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Bis did fantastic work in Sao Paulo with that orchestra. So did Naxos, actually. They both did. But this is a beautiful, beautiful recording. It's an SACD, if that matters to you. And Sudbin is, I think he's always interesting. He really is. He's a very, very smart pianist who has lots of ideas about how the music should go, and they're usually good ideas. I mean, they normally work. So that's one worth considering. Then, this one just blew my mind. Absolutely. Denis Matsuev with Yuri Timirkanov and the St. Petersburg Philharmonic. Now, this is coupled with the Shostakovich First Piano Concerto, and it is the most dynamite Shostakovich First Piano Concerto I think I've ever heard. It's absolutely nuts. It's brilliant beyond belief. It's just incredible. And Matsuev, redid that, I think, with Gergiev, and it wasn't nearly as good. Of course not. It was Gergiev. The late Gergiev, should I say. Anyway, his Tchaikovsky, too, is just dynamite. Matsuev is one of those panting and heaving, barn-burning virtuoso types. He just blasts his way through it. It's not unsubtle. He's not vulgar, but he is celebrating his virtuosity. Let's just put it that way. And it is just dynamite. Absolutely dynamite. So I adore this. Timirkanov and Matsuev. It's just amazing. Absolutely amazing. So that one's great. Now we're getting to what I consider to be the sort of finalists. Not that these others were not finalists. Any of them could be. And that's my point, with this concerto. It has given generously of itself to humanity over the years, over the generations. It's an unquenchable masterpiece that can sustain any number of interpretive approaches and come out smelling like a rose. Why? Well, what do you think? Because Tchaikovsky just wrote the tunes. And when you've got the tunes, you can do almost anything, because as long as you don't screw up the tunes, you're in great shape. You could play to your heart's content and indulge in all kinds of interesting things. And so Tchaikovsky's First Piano Concerto is one of those unkillable masterpieces that irritates the crap out of musicologists and people like that, because you can't analyze it in terms of scientific criteria. You cannot define scientifically the beauty of a tune. It just is. And Tchaikovsky's First Piano Concerto has more than its fair share. Remember, it became a pop song. Tonight we love while the stars, or whatever it goes. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Okay, so absolutely marvelous, terribly underrated version was Nelson Freire with Kempe. I love this recording. It was issued here on Sony Odyssey. Cheap. It's now in the Freire box. If that still exists, it was a Freire box. It's actually coupled here with Pinka Zuckerman and Antal Dorati doing the violin concerto, which is pretty good too. But boy, this is a beautiful, beautiful version of the First Piano Concerto. Kempe is really a wonderful conductor of romantic music, late romantic music particularly. But it's even better with Nelson Freire here in the Radio Days collection, which still exists. I checked. This is a wonderful 2-disc set. If you don't have it, by the way, you get the Chopin First Piano Concerto, the Schumann Introduction and Allegro. You get the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto on disc 1, which is 82 minutes long. And then you get Prokofiev number 1, Liszt number 2, and Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto number 3. I mean, it's just a fantastic disc of radio broadcast performances from Freire's unrepentant youth. And it's just wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. But so's this. I mean, this one is a little bit more. It's a studio recording. It's a little bit more staid, let's say. I mean, it's a little less impulsive. But it is very minor differences. And Freire is such a great pianist. And, people only began to realize it when he switched to Decca, because he hadn't made many recordings other than, things in partnership with, like, Martha Argerich and whatnot. But let me just tell you who the it's the ORTF Orchestra under Kurt Mazur from '69. And it really is just a terrific experience, the concerto. It's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So this is the Radio Days one, that is. So Nelson Freire is one of my absolute favorites in the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto. However, no discussion of the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto would be complete without talking about that force of nature, that demoness of the ivories, Martha Argerich. Yeah. Now, there are 3 Martha Argerich recordings that we need to discuss, and God knows how many others, because she just does the same stuff over and over again, and that has been, for me, such a disappointment, because we've discovered that she is not absolutely infallible. In fact, some of her remakes suck. Some of her 27th versions of something are just lousy. And I just don't understand why she does it. Well, she doesn't care, and so clearly she doesn't care. So in Tchaikovsky, it seems, well, the 3 versions I have here, she cares. And boy, does she care. Now, this one is with, was with Charles Dutoit, right? Yes, and I think the Royal Philharmonic, the Royal Philharmonic, with Charles Dutoit. And it was really one of the reference recordings from the day that it was issued. This was a piece that she just nailed from the get-go. I mean, she has all the fire, but also the poetry, and constantly renewed ideas about how to play things that you think are just uninteresting passage work. I mean, she manages to vivify it and to make it come to life. It's just amazing. And this is a wonderful performance. And if this is all that she had done, it would certainly still be one of the reference editions of the piece. However, this being Argerich, there's also the one in this box. And this was her live one with Kondrashin, and I think it's with Bavarian Radio. Let's just be absolutely sure. It's with the Symphony Orchestra of the Bavarian Radio under Kirill Kondrashin. And this is one of those, it's not actually a very speedy performance. It's interesting. It isn't. You would think that she just sort of blasts through it, and it's, but she manages to make it sound as though it is, because she's just so exciting. And there is that fabulous moment in the finale where she gets to the cadenza before the big tune comes in, and all hell breaks loose. I mean, she just attacks the piano, wrong notes be damned, and there are a lot of them, believe me. I mean, I get this image of her just sitting there pounding on it with her fists because she just doesn't care what happens. It's totally uninhibited, a totally uninhibited free-for-all. And when I remember when I first heard it, when it came out, because it's live, and everybody was like, it's amazing. It was just so crazy. And it's fun to hear things like that are crazy. But the problem with crazy, as it is with Zell and Horowitz, exciting as that is too, is that crazy doesn't always bear repetition the best. It really doesn't, because then you know that those missed notes are coming, and having heard it once, so you can just sit back and let your jaw drop and go, oh, wow, that must have been some live concert. That's totally legitimate. But I don't think that this is, it doesn't represent her at her best, because she has both brains and brawn. And this performance is the brawn side. The brain temporarily goes on hiatus. So that's the second one. But exciting it is. Finally, however, my recommended performance, if you're only having one, Dave's fave, for the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto, is this one, Martha Argerich, with the Berlin Philharmonic and Claudio Abbado. Now, Argerich and Abbado, for reasons that I've never understood, made an absolutely fabulous duo in concerto recordings, perhaps because Abbado was this very, kind and generous colleague who gave her the support she needed to just take wing. All of their concerto recordings are stupendous. They really are. They're just the best things that either of them did in some respects. And this Tchaikovsky First, this digital, fabulous sounding, it really does sound great. Berlin Phil recording is just the bee's knees. For me, it is the ultimate Tchaikovsky piano concerto. I don't think anyone is ever going to beat it for the combination. Let me just make sure here. Let me get the timings. Yeah, it's a little zippier than the Kondrashin one in the finale, actually. I'm about the same elsewhere, but it just has that combination of intelligence and virtuosity and abandon and spontaneity. It's as if she's discovering the piece anew as she's playing it. It is just an amazing, amazing performance. And so if I had to pick just one, this is the one it would be. Abbado and Argerich on Deutsche Grammophon. It's one of my all-time favorite piano and orchestra recordings of anything. And that's just how I feel about it. And I hope you do too. And if you haven't heard this, give it a listen. Trust me, it will change the way you view the universe. Or you'll just have a really good experience listening to the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto. Maybe I should lower expectations a little bit. It's a possibility. So keep on listening, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.